So welcome everybody to another episode of the JPN podcast. We want to thank Rabbi Torczyner for joining us this evening. Rabbi Torczyner is the Rabbi Congregation Eitz Chaim at Dogwood Park and a noted lecturer on the topic of medical halacha. Tonight's shiur is titled Keycards, Candle, and Credentials, Navigating the Halachic Challenges of Conferences. Without further ado, Rabbi Torczyner.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be invited to speak for JPN as well as Ematai this evening. And it's a fun topic. The topic of attending conferences on Shabbos is one that I spoke about in Toronto, I think in 2011. And it's high time that I revisited it. So I was glad that to have the opportunity. What I've tried to do with the shiur I've prepared is to deal with the overall question first of attending conferences on Shabbos, and then to deal with conference-specific questions that come up, hotel-specific questions that come up based on the questions that were submitted in advance. I'm very happy if people want to follow up afterwards with questions that I either don't get to or other questions that come up in relation to the topic. I'm always happy to discuss. So overall, is it okay to participate in a conference on Shabbos? So you have to start by asking why doctors go to medical conferences, right? What's the reason for a doctor to go to a medical conference? I mean, I recognize a lot of names here. There are medical doctors on here. Why do you go to a conference?
You're continuing medical education. It's simple. See me. No, you need to get well, you have to do it. If you want to stay good at your job, not just that you have to do it. If you want to stay good at your job, you have to learn and know what's the latest in your industry.
Right. So medical advances as well as fulfilling professional requirements. That's definitely part of it. My reading leads me to also think that part of it is professional networking and advancement. There's the issue of being able to connect with others, particularly being able to present and gets your name out there, which is important professionally. I've also seen it written up in terms of social connections, even entertainment and recreation. There's a fun side to it as well. So, question then is the appropriateness of doing this on Shabbos, understanding that there are real benefits to doing it, substantive benefits from a medical side, from a professional side, from a personal side. Is it okay to go to a professional conference like this on Shabbos? And here, I want to break down the challenges in terms of challenges that will come up with any professional conference, not just medical, and then the uniquely medical issues that arise. Okay, so first we talk professional conferences overall. Anybody want to tell me, forget medical, just in general, going to a professional conference, what issues might arise, like macro issues? I'm not talking now about specific issues like how do I get into my hotel room, but just overall issues that come up with attending a professional conference on Shabbos. What might be concerns?
Uvda d'chol.
Sorry, Uvda d'chol, Harry says. So Uvda d'chol is a funny rabbinic category, very hard to pin down in terms of what exactly it is. We are going to talk about Uvda d'chol a little bit, although we're going to sort of make it a little more robust and bump it up to a biblical or quasi-biblical level. But that's one concern. I see the note in the chat about kashrus, but again, that's one that is narrower. I'm talking about professional conferences as opposed to the room key kosher food, how I'm making kiddush, missing minyan type things, which are also important, but I'm on the macro level. Yes, Robbie.
Taking notes?
So taking notes.
And sometimes when you have questions, they shove a microphone in your face.
Yeah. So I'm going to deal though. I view that as part of the micro. I'm still on the macro side.
Are you going to separate Zoom? Are you going to separate Zoom and conferences in person or not?
Right. So the entire discussion is going to be about in person.
Okay.
That's really where my focus is going to be. Okay. So the key cards are not as much of an issue when you're on Zoom. Sorry, Yocheved, you were going to say?
Yeah, maybe setting a precedent for working on Shabbos, that if you go to a conference, then your company will say, well, if you went to that on Saturdays, why can't you do this other stuff on Saturdays? And it might also cause issues for other professionals within your organization who are from, and now the organization will say, well, so-and-so went to this conference, so-and-so did this, so why can't you do this on Shabbat?
Right. So that's actually a really, really good point, and one that we're going to come back to a little bit at one particular stage of this, the issue of the precedent you set for others. 100% true. I admit that I was not thinking about it in this segment, but you're right, especially because you may have a reason why this particular conference was okay. That is not something you could extrapolate to other conferences. So 100% true. I'm gonna I think offer three macro issues that are relevant here. Pacey, there was a question in the chat asking if this is accredited. I don't know the answer to that.
I can find out and get back to you. If you can private message one of the admins on the chat.
Okay, thank you. For those who are normally in my Toronto ones that are accredited, I did not have anything to do with accrediting this one. We didn't do it. This isn't from the Toronto side. Okay, so three concerns. Concern number one, and this is along the lines of what Harry was talking about, the issue of the mitzvah of Shabbaton. If you take a look on your sheet, I brought you a passage from the Rambam. It's source number one. I just put the link in the chat again for the source sheet. And I'm going to read my English translations in the interests of time. I'm told that the JPN Shiurim are normally 45 minutes, but I'm allowed to go a little longer, but I'm not planning on going too much longer. So the Rambam writes that the Torah says, you shall cease. You're supposed to halt your work, tishbot. You're supposed to halt on Shabbos. A person is required to cease even from practices which are not malacha. When the Torah says to stop, it doesn't just mean stop doing malacha, the 39 categories of prohibited labor on Shabbos. The sages forbade many activities as shavut. Shavut is a term we usually use to refer to rabbinic prohibitions, some of which are prohibited because they resemble malacha, and some of which are prohibited lest one come to violate a capital crime. So the Rambam does something very strange here, right? The Rambam says that the Torah, he quotes you a pasuk, the Torah says you shall cease something on Shabbos, and he says that means things that are not malacha, and then he applies it to Shavut, which are rabbinically prohibited activities on Shabbos. But the text he quoted was biblical. How could you have a biblical text that tells you to stop doing things that are rabbinically prohibited? That doesn't seem to fit. So the Maggid Mishnah in source number 2 explains what the Rambam is doing. He says, our master means that the Torah prohibited the specifics of malacha, but a person could still have strained in non-malacha pursuits all day. And so the Torah said, you shall cease. So in other words, what he's saying is, there is another layer. Yes, there are the malacha categories, things, acts of labor that are prohibited under the Torah's prohibition against malacha on Shabbos. But then there's also the issue of making sure you are not exerting yourself all day long. And then he has a slightly different formulation, or our master means that rabbinic shavut has support from the biblical, you shall cease. Either way, what he's saying is that there is a biblical basis for saying that on Shabbos, I'm not supposed to do activities which will take away from Shabbos, even though they're not malacha. There's a classic line in the Ramban about this. I've used it in other shiurim, the Ramban in Parshas Emor, Vayikra 23-24, but I chose to go with the Rambam instead here. And then in source number 3, Rabbi Chil Michal Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan, and the way that he explains it and summarizes the issue. He writes, the Ritva wrote, citing the Ramban, that we have a tradition that the Shavut prohibitions are not like other rabbinic prohibitions. When the rabbi said don't do certain things on Shabbos, it's not like other rabbinic law. The Shavut prohibitions are treated as biblical prohibitions. The proof of this is, were it not so, how could Shabbos be called a day of rest and ceasing? In other words, the rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbos are meant to keep the atmosphere of Shabbos as a day of rest. So as an example, we have a law of muktzah. Muktzah is fundamentally rabbinic. So I'm not allowed, as an example, to handle something that is normally used for prohibited purposes on Shabbos. I'm not allowed to handle my car keys. I'm not allowed to handle a pen and paper, a pen, things like that. Why not? In order to preserve the atmosphere of the day. And what we're learning now is, even though the rabbis gave us the specifics of this is what is muktzah, this is not muktzah, whatever, it's in fulfillment of a biblical command. Because otherwise Shabbos would stop being a day of rest. And you could read the rest of source number 3 to see how the Aruch HaShulchan explains that. But the concept that we're getting at here is that there is a quasi-biblical prohibition against doing things that take away from the atmosphere of Shabbos. So now I come, and Uvda Dechol, Harry, is part of this overall. But then you get to now ask yourself, so I'm going to be at a professional conference on Shabbos? How in the world am I going to preserve my Shabbos atmosphere when I'm going around from session to session, interacting with people, as you know, especially because most of the people at this conference presumably are not Jewish, certainly are not observing Shabbos. Their phones are ringing, they're writing stuff down and engaged in a dialogue with me in which they may pull out their phone to try to show me something. Like, how am I preserving my Shabbos atmosphere? That's concern number 1. Concern number 2 is discussing the business side of medicine. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya. It's read in the Haftorah Yom Kippur morning, but originally it appeared in Yeshaya, in which he talks about what we're supposed to do to preserve Shabbos. And one of the things he says is, you're not supposed to seek your own desires on Shabbos, and you are not supposed to speak of things. What does that mean? So source number 4, I brought you a summary from, again, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein in his Aruch HaShulchan. He says, it is written, and he's quoting the passage in Yeshaya chapter 58. If you restrain your foot because of Shabbos from pursuing your business on my holy day, and you shall honor it, neither doing your own ways, nor pursuing your own business, nor speaking of vain matters. This is what Hashem says is incumbent upon us on Shabbos, not to pursue our business, not to speak of vain matters. We see that a person may perform neither business nor trade on Shabbos, even if it does not involve one of the central forbidden tasks, any malacha. We are warned against acting out our business as well as speaking about it. So if I'm going to go to a professional conference, medical or otherwise, and I'm going to discuss the business side of things, because that also comes up in a medical conference, I now have a problem, right? This is my second issue. I'm not supposed to be discussing business. Now, here's an interesting side note. Discussing business is a problem. Observing business is actually not. So what I mean by that, if you take a look at sources 5 and 6, the Gemara in source number 5 says, you're not allowed to strike an anvil on Shabbos. That's not okay. You're training yourself in smith work. However, you are allowed to watch a craftsman on Shabbos and learn technique from watching this craftsman. And in source number 6, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, the Chafetz Chaim, in his Mishnah Berurah says, one may watch a craftsman work on Shabbos, even if it is educational. So let's take it out of the realm of medicine. I am a woodworker, and I'm going to go watch an exhibition by an expert woodworker on Shabbos. I'm certainly not allowed to work wood on Shabbos, but I'm allowed to watch. However, it appears only if this occurs via happenstance. And even then, he must be careful not to speak to the non-Jewish craftsman, as we have discussed. He says you have to be careful. You can't talk about it, and it really shouldn't be something you do regularly. But he notes, theoretically, it would be okay. And this gets quoted in discussions about watching an operation, watching a particular medical technique on Shabbos. But my second issue is overall, more globally, the issue of discussing the business side of medicine. And then there's a third issue. And this one, I guess, moves sort of towards what Yocheved said earlier. And the third issue is that there's a maris ayin issue. There's an appearances issue, right? Meaning people aren't going to necessarily know that you are refraining from taking notes. You're refraining from carrying things that are muktzah. You're refraining from dealing on the business side and all of that. They may not be aware that what you're doing is fine. And therefore, they may suspect you of wrongdoing or come to think that it's okay to do things that in fact are not okay. Now, here I bring you a fascinating quote, which has great repercussions beyond our topic right now. Rabbi J. David Bleich gave a shir, which is recorded and available on YU Torah, If you take a look at source number 7, I transcribed one line from it. He says, there is never a problem of, I see the note, Rose. But he says, there is never a problem of maris ayin with regard to something that involves an activity which is absolutely mutter, even though somebody is not informed, somebody who is not informed may not know that it's mutter. So in other words, in the event that I'm going to a conference and it's permitted to go to the conference, and somebody thinks you're not allowed to go to conferences, that's not my problem. Their ignorance is not my issue. If what I'm doing is fine and they think what I'm doing is not fine, that's not a problem. The problem comes into play when they think I'm doing something that actually is prohibited. So I'll give a separate example, not a conference example. Let's say I am eating meat and I'm drinking almond milk, and they know that it's almond milk, and they think almond milk is dairy. So that's not my problem. That's not maris ayin. They just need to be better educated. Almond milk is not dairy. However, if they think that I'm drinking cow's milk, then I do have a problem of appearances. I need to disabuse them of that, because then, they would be right. If I were drinking cow's milk, that would be a problem. Okay, so we have 3 challenges in going to any professional conference. 1, the Shabbaton atmosphere. You're supposed to have an atmosphere of halting everything. That's a biblical issue. You're not allowed to discuss the business side of medicine, and you also have the maris ayin problem. Then we have to talk about a specific challenge, which is studying medicine on Shabbos. Am I allowed to study medicine on Shabbos at all? So some argue that you're only allowed to learn Torah on Shabbos. You're not allowed to learn other things on Shabbos. There's a Gemara in Shabbos, source number 8, which talks about the issue. It's initially talking about using a written list of guests to host people on Shabbos. And Abaye says, I'm not supposed to use a written list of guests. His concern is lest you come to read mundane documents. And the Rambam on that issue in source number 9 says the following: one may not count from a written list, lest one read letters on Shabbos, a practice which is forbidden, for one may read nothing on Shabbos or Yom Tov beyond the books of the prophets and their explanations. This even applies to works of wisdom and knowledge. This is always very interesting when I explain this to people, because it's kind of surprising. Everyone reads the Rambam as being very friendly towards secular wisdom and certainly towards medicine, but the Rambam says that's not what Shabbos is for. He says, don't ruin my Shabbos. My Shabbos is just for Torah. I'll take care of the Sultan's family all week long, till 2 a.m. But let me on Shabbos not have to worry about the Sultan's family. So says the Rambam. And in fact, Rav Yaakov Emden, in a tshuva, in Shelas Yavetz Aleph Mem Aleph, uses that to prohibit watching a dissection on Shabbos. However, the Rashba disagreed with the Rambam. The Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ibn Aderet, in source number 10, said that's not true. He was asked not about medicine. He was asked about using an astrolabe on Shabbos. I don't know how many people here have used an astrolabe when it wasn't Shabbos, but nonetheless, this was a big thing in the 13th century. May you use an astrolabe on Shabbos? And look at his response in number 10. He says, he responded further, this is he being the Rashba, that one may look at an astrolabe on Shabbos. It's a utensil, it's a kli. And any utensil may be used for its own self. Even a utensil that is used for purposes that are prohibited on Shabbos, that its normal use is one that you're not allowed to use on Shabbos, doesn't matter. Certainly when it is only like one of the books of wisdom. What difference is there between that which is engraved on copper plaques in an iron pen and that which is written in a book? He says all the different engravings on the astrolabe, the markings that you're using to tell the position of the stars and so on, he says, I'm allowed to read science books on Shabbos, so why wouldn't I be allowed to read the markings on the astrolabe? That's the Rashba's comment, from which we understand. And he actually has 2 responses where he says the same thing. I brought one of them. But the Rashba says there's nothing wrong with reading medical texts on Shabbos. He has no problem with that, with scientific texts, I should say, books of wisdom. He has no problem with reading scientific texts on Shabbos. So when we get to the Shulchan Aruch, in source number 11, Rabbi Yosef Karo says, like the Rambam, One may learn nothing but Torah on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Even books of wisdom are prohibited, although some permit, which is the Rashba. According to that latter view, one may look at an astrolabe on Shabbos. Yes, because that's exactly what the Rashba said. In number 12, the Mishnah Berurah says, the practice is to permit. So the Shulchan Aruch started you off with the Rambam and said, by the way, there is a view of the Rashba. And the Mishnah Berurah brings you the Rashba's view and says that's what people tend to do. The practice is to permit reading these things on Shabbos. Eliyahu Rabbah wrote that one who is in awe of heaven should be strict, because the Rambam as well as the Ran prohibit. But the Mishnah Berurah says the practice in general is to be lenient. So number one, may I study non-Torah things on Shabbos? The answer is it's a debate, but the view of the Rashba is a view that is often relied on for non-Torah things. And the key next step is, when it comes to medicine, the sources are especially supportive. In other words, it could be that we'll follow the Rambam when it comes to learning about meteorology. However, when it comes to medicine, we're more likely to follow the Rashba and be lenient. If you take a look, I'm going a little quickly. I hope that's okay. If not, I apologize. We're 20 minutes in. I just realized that. But if you take a look at at source number 13, Rabbi Yosef Kara, writing in his Beis Yosef on the Tur, quotes the Agur, an early Ashkenazi source, that the Rashba and Ramban permitted reading works of medicine on Shabbos because that is wisdom. It is not like the mundane documents that we were concerned about in source number 8. He says specifically books of medicine are okay. Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg wrote an article in the second volume of the journal Asya where he addressed this and brought many sources testifying to the importance of studying medicine, which hopefully people on a Zoom of the Jewish Physicians Network already know. They nonetheless, as an example, source number 14, this is a classic, in which Rav Huna says to his son Rabbah, why didn't you go to the shir? Why didn't you go to the class of Rav Chisda? He's really sharp. And Rabbah said, why in the world would I go there? He asks me questions about mundane matters. He's teaching me about how one conducts himself in the bathroom. And to which Rav Huna replied to his son, he says, you call that mundane matters? That's a matter of health. Of course you should learn that. Learning medicine is really important. The specific example there is a discussion for another time, but it's vital to learn medicine. Source number 15 is a letter that the Ramban wrote. He said, understanding medicine to gauge every trait and know every form and the rest of the fields of knowledge, the sages adjured us and instructed us in them. You need to know medicine. Some say that the Ramban actually was a practicing physician. That's always been unclear to me, but he does write a lot about medicine. The Rogatchover, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, in source number 16, also speaks of the importance of learning medicine. You can see it there in number 16. So because of this, even those who are strict like the Rambam about most fields of knowledge will still approve studying medicine on Shabbos. So where does all of this take us? Right? We're asking the overall question of, do you go to conferences on Shabbos? Right now we have 3 major concerns with any professional conference and the general issue of, am I allowed to study medicine on Shabbos? So the general principle is this, when you look at halachic authorities on this. The various professional goals involved in attending a conference can often be achieved in other ways, especially in a post-COVID world where there's less travel and there's much more virtual connection. So Rabbi Bleich, as an example of this, if you take a look at source number 17, this comes from that same shir of his, Questions and Answers with Doctors, Part 1, that you can find on YU Torah. Look what he has to say there. This shir that he gave is a while ago. This shir that he gave was at least 13 years ago, because I saw it before I gave my shir in 2011. So I know it's at least 13 years ago. He says, if you do have a patient who is suffering from a life-threatening disease, and the only way you can get crucial information is by listening to a paper, then go ahead. But that's the theoretical world. I think in the real world, you could get the same information some other way. If no other way than by making a phone call to whoever is going to be reading. My impression is that in the usual course of events, you would be able to find what information is necessary for the treatment of your patient by a simple phone call. You may understand the procedure a lot better from the discussion, right, at the conference, but it would be rather difficult to think of a situation in which it would be absolutely imperative for the treatment of your patient that you be in actual attendance during the reading of a paper. Of course, the theoretical information that you might acquire that way might be beneficial sometime down the road because you don't know what complications may arise in the next patient that presents itself with this disease or syndrome or what have you. But that's not in the category of a chol lefanenu. The chol lefanenu being the criteria to be considered to be saving lives. You have to have a patient who actually needs your help right now. So Rabbi Blech says you certainly can't call this like life-saving to go to a conference, barring some extremely unusual circumstance. He says, really, you can get that kind of support without having to go to the conference. And it is a concern for Shabbos. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, in source number 18 from his Shiurei Torah L'Rofim, wrote, it appears that learning medicine for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvot of he shall live by them, he shall surely heal, he shall restore him to him. These are all sources for the mitzvah of practicing medicine. He says it is permitted. He's willing to say it is permitted on Shabbos, just as it is permitted to arrange marriages for girls and arrange for a child's education, other things that are mentioned in the Gemara. He is willing to say that you are allowed. Oh, you know what I did here? Okay, I had another source that I wanted here, but I didn't realize that I didn't bring it. Okay, sorry, I didn't get to source number 18 yet. Hang on. But the page after what's in 18, he's concerned about the effects of the conference on your Shabbos. They missing all the mitzvot of the day, participating in the general atmosphere of the conference. So basically what you end up with is a statement that it's not ideal for somebody to be going to a conference on Shabbos, barring a unique opportunity that really, requires its own shaila. I asked the question of Rav Hershel Schachter, just myself, and he's very much a fan of the Rambam's view as opposed to the Rashba's view on this. However, if it comes down to a necessity, and that may include a professional necessity as opposed to a medical, save a particular patient necessity, then halachic authorities indeed are lenient. Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg, both in his article in the journal Asya, as well as in his Harafua Kahalacha, like Zion, it's Aleph Daled Beis, brings the permission in the case of need. Rabbi Zilberstein, in source number 18, that it would be permitted to do so. Dr. Fred Rosner, in source number 19 as well, says, therefore, this is an article in the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society. Therefore, within the framework of halachic permissibility, the medical student or house officer must sacrifice some of the spirit of the Sabbath in order to obtain the maximum training in his chosen profession. With the clear understanding that there will be no violation of Sabbath law, such as taking notes, operating lab equipment, etc., the student should attend those lectures and conferences that will add significantly to his mastery of the art and science of medicine. The same principle applies to the physician in practice who may attend certain vitally important conferences on the Sabbath to maintain or improve his level of competence in medical practice, provided no Sabbath laws are violated. The availability of tapes now, 1990, partially obviates the need to attend general conferences. However, where personal contact with a lecturer is critically important, it may be permitted on the Sabbath. So he's not talking about it in terms of professional growth and networking. He's talking about it in terms of medical knowledge. That's really where Dr. Rosner said it. It's worth noting he also is okay with a medical student participating in the conference. The reason why that catches my eye is source number 20. The Nishmas Avram, Rabbi Dr. Avram Sofer Abraham quotes Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach to say, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wrote to me, a doctor certainly may, and he is performing a mitzvah when learning from medical texts on Shabbos. And the Gaon added verbally, the Gaon meaning Rav Shlomo Zalman, that a medical student must be strict, as he is not treating patients now. He felt that a medical student who is not at the stage of treating patients really should avoid this on Shabbos, and Rabbi Dr. Steinberg brought this as well. So what we're saying is, preference is really not to be going to these conferences on Shabbos. Get your medical information somewhere else, do your networking somewhere else, do your put your name out there for people in some other way. However, where there's a unique opportunity, I have a specialty, and this conference is going to speak to that and give me information and give me opportunities to connect with. One last note on this, and then I'm going to pause to let people ask questions. I'm getting a message here that my internet connection is unstable. Are you having that issue also on your, am I clear or not clear?
It was just the last minute or
Just a minute. Literally, it's not even a minute.
Okay. All right. Let me know if it happens again, because I can switch rooms, and that may help. But Rabbi Dr. Steinberg in source number 21 said, this medical study does not override prohibitions of Shabbos, even rabbinic prohibitions. This is not in the category of saving lives, since doctors do not study with the haste of saving lives during the week. Right? Meaning, it's not as though the doctor during the week is dropping everything in order to read textbooks, treating it as life-saving. So to jump to that would be extreme. You have to be careful. You're going to go to a conference. Yes, there's license to forego the Shabbos atmosphere. There is not license to violate Shabbos in any number of ways. That still has to be observed. Okay, questions or comments before we move on to conference-specific issues? Okay, now let's move on to the conference-specific issues. All right, so here's a very interesting overarching principle. I'm going to assume, based on what we've said for the last half hour, that anyone who is going to a conference is doing it because of a real necessity. Whether that necessity is medical, they're for their specialty, they need to hear what's being done at the conference, or whether it's professional, they need to be able to interact at the conference in order to be able to make a living. Either way, there is a principle which says that shvus dishvus is permitted for a tzorech. What that means is asking, and in our particular context, what it means is asking a non-Jew to do something that is itself only rabbinically prohibited on Shabbos is allowed where there is a need. So even though normally I'm not allowed to ask non-Jews to do things for me on Shabbos, right? If I'm sitting in a room and it's dark, I'm not allowed to ask a non-Jew to turn on the light. Nonetheless, where there is a great need and where the act I'd be asking them to do is only rabbinically prohibited, then it's okay. You need both of those. It has to be a derabanan, and it has to be a case of great need, and that's the Shulchan Aruch in source number 22. That which is not a malacha and is only rabbinically prohibited on Shabbos, a Jew may tell a non-Jew to do it on Shabbos if there is some illness or there is a great need for it or for a mitzvah. And some prohibit, some do not like this, but there is such a head there. And in source number 23, I will show you an application of this, which when I first read it, I said, really? He said that? But he did. And I think it's very applicable for conferences. My Torontonian friends who are on this chat are familiar with something called From Toronto. They send out an email every week telling you that the Erev is up, assuming that it is. And they also include in there questions and answers on halachic topics that are vetted and moderated by Rabbi Bartfeld, Rabbi Avram Bartfeld. And historically, they were usually asked of Rav Shlomo Miller. Now there are other people he also asks them to. Look at this one from source number 23. The question is, a medical resident that is completing his residency must take an advanced trauma licensing course. The available courses at this time are offered on Shabbos throughout Canada. When the course is completed, there is a test. The test is multiple choice, so an oval in front of the letter A, B, C, or D must be filled in case you didn't know how multiple choice works. Can the Jew tell the non-Jew to fill in the ovals on the test for him? Is there any difference if the test is on paper or on the computer in terms of telling the non-Jew to do this for him? The administrators of the course refused to let the Jewish resident take the test after Shabbos. The administrators claim that in the past, this goes back to Yocheved's point, when there have been religious Jews at the Saturday course, they had a non-Jew fill in the answers for the Jew. So I know that there were Jews who were okay with a non-Jew filling it out. So the question is, could you have a non-Jew? You'll tell them the answer is C, and the non-Jew will actually be the one to fill in C on your behalf. Lo and behold, the answer. Learning medicine with the intention to help the suffering is a mitzvah. We permit two interrelated rabbinical prohibitions. That's the shvus to shvus. In a case of great need while performing a mitzvah. One rabbinical
Rabbi Torczyner, Rabbi Torczyner, we lost you.
Such as writing with the left hand for someone that is right-handed. All right. Hopefully this will be better. Okay. So did you catch the question that was set up? You caught the question. Okay. So the answer he gives is that learning medicine with the intention to help the suffering is a mitzvah, and that we permit two interrelated rabbinical prohibitions. That's the shvus to shvus. And so he says you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to do something that is rabbinically prohibited on Shabbos, such as if he's going to write on the test paper using his left hand. So therefore, he says, Rav Shlomo Miller Shlita's opinion is that it is permitted to instruct the Gentile to fill in the answers with his left hand in case of great need. The above does not apply to the use of a computer. People type using both hands. As not all cases qualify for the above heter or permission, you must consult with a competent rabbinical authority on each instance. So it's not open-ended. You should ask a rabbi your question. But he says that you could apply this principle of shvus to shvus, this principle of asking a non-Jew to do that which is rabbinically prohibited in order to meet the particular tzorech, to meet the particular need that is involved. So when I read that, I thought, well, that would be something you could rely on if you had to go to a conference for Shabbos. Now, you need to make the arrangement with them before Shabbos, right? To avoid the problems, you should really make the arrangement with them before Shabbos. That would be ideal. And number two, you want to pay them some kind of a fixed sum for the overall job as opposed to paying them by the hour. You want them to be doing this for themselves. I'm not getting into the entire discussion of what's called Maisa Shabbos, but you want them to be working for themselves as opposed to working for you. So you pay them in order to have them do this. So if you have to go to a conference on Shabbos, there are all sorts of circumstances, things that are going to come up that need doing. Your best bet is find someone who isn't Jewish who's also going to the conference and stick with them to help with a whole bunch of things. Not only that, and this is going to be counterintuitive, I'm giving this advice not academically exactly, but I'm giving the advice as someone who hasn't tried it. And it could be that someone who tries this will say, no, this is a bad idea. But I feel like if you could actually arrange to room with your non-Jewish friend who is going to the conference, you will be best off. Because then things like, how do I get into my room, right? You just go, when they're going back to the room. Things like that become a lot more manageable. So that's just an overall point for dealing with issues that come up at the conference is having a non-Jew who you're going to be with, who is going to help throughout. So let's talk about conferences and what goes on at conferences. So presenting. Someone asked a question about hanging a poster. So for you to be able to hang a poster, creates problems. I can't tape things up and so on. However, my handy dandy non-Jewish friend could potentially do, rabbinically prohibited things, not biblically prohibited things. So you have to gauge each thing that you're asking him to do. But, as an example of that, most halachic authorities consider manipulation of electricity on Shabbos to be a derabanan. Rav Asher Weiss disagrees. but most consider it to be a derabanan. So, if he wanted to manipulate slides on the computer, you'd find, you could theoretically do it. I have to be honest and tell you, it feels very strange to me to permit that. I'm having a hard time with it. Nonetheless, I think letter of the law, I think he would be able to. This will not allow you to use a microphone. You won't be able to speak into a microphone. That's still going to be a problem. I think presenting on Shabbos is a very hard sell. To think that one would be able to do that, I think I think that's a very unlikely thing. Attending is easier. So when somebody attends a conference, one of the things that comes up, and I got a lot of questions about this, not only this time, but when I taught a class on this topic, whatever it was, a dozen years ago, is the issue of the ID badge. The wearing the ID badge and so on. Is an ID badge muktzah? So in the event that it gets scanned, so you can make the argument that it's a kli shemalachto le'isser. It is an item which normally is used in prohibited ways. However, if it's just something that people see and then allow you in, then it's not muktzah. In other words, you have a badge that shows that you're registered for this conference, this room, whatever it is, then you're then you'd be okay. One of the questions that comes up along with ID badges is, what about name tags that have to be stuck? That have to be stuck on and removed from their backing and so on. So when it comes to a name tag sticker and separating it from its backing, there is some debate regarding this. The Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, is not happy with removing it from its backing, because he says that is considered to be like tearing. It's like tearing apart a stitch when you take this and separate it from the backing. Rav Asher Weiss disagrees. I brought them in sources 24 and 25 on the sheet. Rav Asher Weiss disagrees. He is lenient because he says there's no intention of sticking the sticker, the label, to the backing. It's just that the company needs to make sure that the sticker isn't going to get stuck to something and then be useless by the time the consumer gets it. So they specifically stick it to something which will not remain stuck. They're specifically trying to avoid that, to avoid a long-term connection. So Rav Asher Weiss says that it's not a problem for you to peel it off on Shabbos. He says best to open it before Shabbos if you can, obviously, but it's not the end of the world. It would also be good to have a non-Jew do it. Attaching it to clothing creates a problem of creating a stitch. You are now sticking things together. So it's not intended to be permanent, and therefore there may be grounds for leniency. Rav Asher Weiss, in the same responsum that I brought in number 25, deals with that and says, yeah, we better to have a non-Jew be the one to attach it to the clothing. When you remove it from clothing, you should also be careful not to remove threads from the clothing. I see the note in the chat. According to Rav Asher, would you be allowed to open sealed suit pockets on Shabbos, since it's just the way the manufacturer keeps them closed? That's an interesting question, which takes us into a couple of other areas as well. So I'm going to leave it be. It's a good question. If you remind me later, I can email you some thoughts on it. But there are a couple of other issues that would come into play. Your best options with a name tag would be have a name tag holder with you, into which you can simply slide the tag with the backing. In other words, you don't need to peel it off and stick it to your clothing. Just when you go to a conference, have a lanyard or whatever it is, and then you just slide it in and slide it out, and that's the easiest thing to do. Or use a pin to attach it without removing the backing from it as well. You can do that. You just make sure that you don't run the pin into the clothing, like in and out of it in a way that it's like a stitch. You just stab it in once and that's it. One of the big issues that comes up in conference centers, convention centers, hotels on Shabbos is the issue of an Erev Chatzeros. This is an issue. The rule is that a Jew is not allowed to transport things between one private area and a second private area on Shabbos. That's a rabbinic prohibition, separate from the issue of public domains. So that within the conference center itself, everything is inside a building. But my room is separate from the hallway, and the hallway is separate from somebody else's room that I may want to go into, and I'm not allowed to carry things from one room into another. So there are those who argue for leniency. And by the way, this would be relevant not only for carrying things, but potentially even for wearing the name tag. Because wearing things that people frequently remove as they're walking is problematic on Shabbos. If I have a nice piece of jewelry that when I meet somebody, they're going to say, oh, can I look at that? I'm going to take it off to show them, is a problem on Shabbos. And I brought you in source number 26 from the Ramah, dealing with this issue of a government badge of some kind that they decreed that people had to walk around with on their clothing. So my problem is going from my room into the hallway in this conference center. So there are those who argue that an Erev Chatzeros is not needed. And their argument is these aren't separate private domains, your room and somebody else's room and so on. It's all one domain owned by the ownership of the hotel. They have complete control over it. They can move the furniture in and out. They could decide you're staying in one room, you're staying in a different room. There are those who argue that no Erev Chatzeros is needed. However, the majority view is that no, you actually should set up an Erev Chatzeros, which is its own discussion of how to do it. Anybody wants information on that, you can email me. I'll be glad to send you some references. I probably should have put on the sheet, but I didn't. But an Erev Chatzeros would likely be needed for somebody at the conference. Going back to the badge, that was also badge and name tag. But if they are going to scan your badge, right, are you able to cooperate? So I think you could make the argument that the scan is really for their sake. It permits you to enter, but they're the ones who care about scanning it. As far as you're concerned, you would just like to be able to enter the room. You could make such an argument. It would be better, obviously, to make a different arrangement. Or, once again, your handy-dandy friend carrying your badge can take care of that. Okay. Listening to a presentation via a microphone. So in the event that it's a non-Jew making the presentation, you're allowed to listen. Rabbi J. David Bleich talked about that in the podcast, the audio recording that I've referenced a couple of times. He permits it. There is the view of Rosh Shlomo Zalman who does not like it. Rosh Shlomo Zalman believes that just like I'm not allowed to speak into a microphone, I'm also not allowed to listen to something through a microphone on Shabbos. But that seems to be a minority view. I'm able to listen, and there are numerous sources that speak to that. However, if it's a Jew who is doing the presentation, then I really should not be listening. That seems to be problematic on multiple levels. On one level, I'm benefiting from malacha done on Shabbos by a Jew. So that's one problem. And if you take a look on your sheet at source number 27, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein argues that it's also Chilul Hashem. He says, all of this, by which he means permission to listen to the presentation, is when the presenter is a non-Jewish doctor. But if he is a Shabbos desecrating Jew and he speaks with a microphone and displays slides, this includes Chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name, and it is inappropriate for a Shabbos observing doctor to be present there. He says, don't do it. Don't go to the session where a Jew is presenting in a microphone on Shabbos. And I had, years ago when I looked into this, I emailed Rabbi Dr. Avram Sofer Abraham about this, and he also said to me, yeah, a Jew should not attend, unless he said, if the session is going to convey information that you're going to use to save the life of a patient, like what Rabbi Bleich was talking about before. But barring that, not. Barring that, one really should not. What about the conference materials, the stuff they're giving out? Are those materials muktzah? So obviously, if they're giving out USB, yes, that's muktzah. What about just like papers and stuff? So the Rashba we already saw is certainly fine, right? He compared the astrolabe to books of wisdom and had no problem with those texts. And indeed, the Shulchan Aruch mentions it in source number 28. He quotes the Rashba. The Rambam I think, would not be happy. The Shulchan Aruch writes that the Rambam's view is unclear. I'm not so sure that it is unclear. I think the Rambam would not be happy. However, to my surprise, if you take a look at source number 29, the Chavetz Chaim in his Mishnah Berurah quotes the Vilna Gaon, who says that the Rambam would permit handling the materials. The Gra also sided with the Rashba regarding learning those things, but he says the Rambam would not say they're muktzah. I don't know why, but that's clearly what the Mishnah Berurah says, quoting the Vilna Gaon. Someone asked, one of the questions that was submitted was the question of giving out contact information on Shabbos. So initiating would certainly be problematic. For me to give somebody my email address, my phone number, so that they can contact me after Shabbos, that's preparing for after Shabbos pretty explicitly. So that's not allowed. What if they ask me, what's your email? What's your phone number? So there you would run into V'daber Davar, that we talked about before, speaking about non-Shabbos activities. It really would be best to find them after Shabbos. And again, if you have your non-Jewish friend who is accompanying you and they want to give them the information, that's their business. But for a Jew to give out a phone number or an email address on Shabbos, I think is problematic. I don't think that it's, I don't think that's such a good thing. Okay. Another issue that people always ask about, and I think it was one of the submitted questions, and maybe I'll do like one or two more. Is that okay, Pacey? We're good? Okay. So one or two more items. But one that people always ask about is, how do I get into my room? They only have electronic keys. They don't have a mechanical key. How am I getting into my room? So again, if you're sharing the room with a non-Jew, that's great. Just work around their schedule. What's wrong with me just using the electronic key? So number one, the key itself is muktzah if it's used for electronically scanning the encoded information on the key. You could theoretically maybe get around that if you write your room number down on the key and you write the daily schedule down on the key before Shabbos. So now it has another function. It's also your schedule. It's not only a key to get into a room. So shkayach, you have managed to deal with the muktzah issue. However, you still have the issue of activating the lock to unlock the room. So there's a well-known view of Rav Nachum Rabinovich, a serious halachic authority, formerly of Toronto at one point, to be lenient. It was an article he published in Tchumen, but I have not seen halachic authorities in general agree with him. So what is an option, and Rav Moshe Stern in his Be'er Moshe, and I brought it in source number 30, describes an arrangement in which you make a prior arrangement with a concierge. Now, the truth is that people quote it as being from this Be'er Moshe, that's in number 30. I don't see that he's actually supporting this in number 30. I think he's describing a situation, not prescribing what you ought to do. Nonetheless, what he describes is a situation where you walk in, a non-Jew who works there or is just around there sees you and knows, oh, you want to get into your room. And so he decides, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to unlock the room, figuring, you're going to give him a tip. He figures that he'll get something back from you for it. So some suggest that it's okay. And I've seen that arrangement in practice in hotels where the Jew walks in, there's somebody at the counter who knows, oh, I better unlock room, 817 or whatever it is. Rabbi Josh Flug, in an article on this, quotes Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein in Melachim Omnayach as offering two ways to structure this kind of a deal so that the non-Jew is really doing it for himself. He has one suggestion of keeping a significant gift for the non-Jew in the room. Which I find interesting because, like, if you were to tell a non-Jew, I have a gift for you in my hotel room, I'm not so sure that goes over well. But he suggests that, and also keeping your Shabbos food in the room. And that way there is a tzorech, there is a need involved. That's an interesting approach. He also quotes Rabbi Yashiv, who suggests that when you make the arrangement initially, when you register for the hotel initially, you tell them, I can't use an electronic card. The only way I'm able to stay here is if you have some other way to let me into the room. And that way, whatever arrangement they make to enable you to get into the room is something they're doing for their own benefit because they want you to stay in their hotel. They're doing it for their own good. So those are options that may help. And again, we're operating in a framework where you really need to be at this conference or you wouldn't be doing this all together. There has to be a level of need in the first place. Last item, bathrooms with motion sensors. That's a big one. So the consensus of halachic authorities is to permit using the bathroom where it will flush afterwards, where you don't have other options. That's the consensus. In terms of hand washing with such a sink, though, if you have other options at all, an example would be if you have hygienic wipes that are okay to use on Shabbos or something like that, you'd be better off with that as opposed to operating a sink. But for the toilet, it would be considered justified. Okay. I mean, you can go on and on. Like there's endless stuff that comes up. Let me ask: are there questions? We'll give it another 4 minutes for people with questions if they have.
Yeah. I just want to make, I guess, a comment. I was at a recent conference on Zoom. The conference was in New York, and the majority of the presenters, I was pleased to say, were Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm thinking to myself, and they are like world experts, a lot of them from Israel. I'm thinking, what would happen if we had to really follow the letter of the law? Does that mean that all those world experts who have gotten all these awards and everything, who are Jews, who we're so proud of, what would happen?
I think if they really need all of those experts, they could just move the conference to Sunday.
You know what?
If we were that influential.
I don't want to. Well, the truth is that I don't know in your experience, but I don't know any conference that doesn't start Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or else Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's like that's been universal.
I mean, I do know doctors who go to conferences and simply skip the Shabbos part.
Yeah.
And a lot also depends on time of year. You do it at this time of year, Shabbos is over fairly early.
Yeah.
I see the note in the chat. The Chaved conference is on Shabbos. Hopefully, it doesn't involve having to do any note-taking or microphone listening on Shabbos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tough.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Torczyner, for this wonderful share.
Thank you very much.
The recording will be posted.
Everybody. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Be well then. And
Take care.
and I'll mention for anybody here who doesn't know, although I think most of the people here do know, I give a shiur Monday nights regularly, halacha in healthcare settings. And if anybody's interested, you could always contact me. The source sheet has my email address on the top. And I send out on Tuesday mornings a practical medical halacha WhatsApp, and like 5 to 10 minutes. And everyone is welcome to sign up for that. It's free of charge. I think the topic I'm going to do tomorrow, unless something comes up tonight, is probably lactate on Shabbos. I think that'll be my my topic for tomorrow morning. All right. Be well then. Thank you very much.